Boy, he scared me when he said I have a degree in electrical engineering. I hate it, of course. So, why in the world do you bring an old general up here? That's the question. Tell war stories, which we like to do, and tell you how it's all messed up since we're not in charge anymore. Well, first of all, my war stories aren't all that great. And second, if I told you anything about not being in charge anymore, we're the reason though for the problem. The old generation is that when I talk to young people, that's what I try to explain to them. They're going to have to take charge and fix some of the problems we created. What I think you should get out of this is to understand how we're going to approach from right now where we are in climate change to move forward to try to find solutions. The Department of Defense, defenses all over the world are going to be a significant component contributing to a solution for several reasons. One is that in most countries and in the United States, the military is a significant contributor to what has to happen to mitigate the problem. The United States Air Force is one of the largest users of fuel in the whole world, and it's certainly the largest individual user of fuel in the United States. The United States Army and other militaries use a significant amount of fuel. So from the mitigation standpoint, we're going to be important. But for a more important, you have to recognize that our solution is, in the United States, a whole of government problem. The military and the Department of Defense is in support of finding that solution and making that solution happen. But it's not our job. We will not be the leaders in the United States government in doing that. And across the world, that also is true. Militaries are going to be responsible and have to contribute. And you'll understand more as I go through this at what tasks we're going to have to take on, have to change to be able to accomplish as we move forward in the climate change fight. I sometimes talk about this as a 100 years war. And that's what it is, because if you look at what's already been put into the environment and the consequences we're going to have to live with from that, they last for 100 years, as Rick pointed out, my great battle buddy, Rick Randolph. A lot of the things that are the greenhouse gases, not just CO2, but the others, last more than 100 years in the environment. And they are going to continue to contribute to problems. So that's what we need to know. And the other part about this is, within the United States government, the people who are best at making plans and looking at strategic risk assessment types of things, that's what we do in military planning. We look what are the challenges to our nation in the future. We look at plans to mitigate that, and we look at plans to respond to that. And among the government agencies that we have in the United States, the United States military has been at that the longest time. And what I have spent my career since 1990 doing is trying to convince the Department of Defense that we have to recognize climate change is one of those national security threats that's critical to maintaining peace and security for our country, and therefore peace and security in the world, and we need to treat it as such and look at it just like we look at counterterrorism, look at it at other nations that are not our enemies, but we are concerned with. We need to put it in the same context and build a national security strategy that includes countering climate change. So that's why I'm here today. Let's see, where are we? Good. This is the hard part. You have to look around and then have to balance. This is a slide of the Tibetan Plateau. I use this when I have the time as an example of how climate change is a national security threat. To me, this is one of the most critical places in the world. Why? First, 3.5 billion people live in that, and it's one watershed. 7 of the major rivers of the world come off the Tibetan Plateau. It feeds something like 15 nations. 7 of those 15 nations have the largest militaries in the world. 4 of them are nuclear capable. That doesn't mean they have nuclear power plants. That means they have nuclear weapons. So is this a place that a national security organization ought to look at and be concerned about? When you look at the changes that are occurring in the Tibetan Plateau and the water resources. We're seeing that right now. What's going on in Pakistan? That's one of the nations I'm talking about. Massive flooding. So instead of having water resources that last and produce drinking water and water for use across the year, we have massive floodings at part of the year, and then we have droughts in the other part of the year. Is this a national security threat for the United States? When foreign nuclear armed people are over there that don't get along very well already? Yes, it is. Those are the kinds of things we're talking about. And this is what I study. I have studied environmental security analysis. That's what I have been doing for a while, and that's what I'm talking to you about. Next, oops, where'd you? There it is. Gotta be smarter than you're quick. That's another wrong mistake. I'm not going to read all the slides to you. You read them. What I really hope is that I can encourage you to further examine environmental security as a way to consider what climate change really means to us in the United States, and more particularly in the world, because the biggest message is we're probably the greatest military power in the world. We can use all that power we have, and we can't win this war alone. We won't even come close. Everybody wins or everybody loses in this fight. And so this is like we do other things, but it needs to be everybody in the war forming a coalition for this fight. And oh, by the way, if the United States doesn't lead in building that kind of coalition, it will probably fail. It has in every war history that we have so far. So that's a big goal, and that's one of the things I want you to understand that I hope we can get out of this session. I better do a little advertisement real quick. You're going to get in the email a 2-page sheet that's a summary of everything, so you don't have to write all this down and everything. But hopefully that'll be helpful to you to kind of keep track. And it also has a reference to some of the newer books that are out that talk about climate change and national security. And I have a couple of them up here if you want to look at them. I didn't invent this. I started studying this in the early 1990s when I went to be the head of the department at West Point and start the environmental engineering program for the United States Military Academy. 1991, we decided we needed to teach Army officers about environmental engineering to do the mission, the whole mission of the Army. And it's up and running and doing quite well, thank you. I think the best thing that I've ever seen that describes environmental security is from Norman Myers. He's an Oxford scholar. It's here on the left. I would emphasize in the middle, you will notice in 1985, from his work in the 70s and 80s, he already identified climate as one of the key environmental security risks that we should be worried about. On the right, you see when I started my work, and I published a little book about this. If you read the book, it's 20 years old. My big emphasis there was water as a scarce resource, was to me the thing that was the biggest threat to national security and stability around the world at that particular time. I talked about climate change, but it wasn't a big issue that I emphasized at that time. Interestingly enough, there were 32 definitions when I did my literature review to write my little book. So the only thing a logical person would do, I wrote the 33rd definition, and that's what you see on the right. Why write the book if you're not creating something, right? It's got to be a process that responds to the need. It isn't something that's a noun. It's got to be an active verb activity. My earliest challenge was inside my organization, not externally. Going into the Pentagon and trying to convince general officers and senior civilians that this was real and that it was something that we had to consider like we consider the other security threats to our nation. Okay, the pictures are from my last tour in Afghanistan. I always talk about my little girl up there. Every day we would go out, we would get our battle on, and we would go outside the fence in Kabul to go around town to do the work that we were assigned to do. And every day I would come up outside their Department of Defense headquarters, and she would be there gathering water. Every time. That was her life. And I think you saw from the pictures that Liz just showed, that's the whole world. Water is that important that it becomes a major element. And then the gentleman trying to gather up some sticks to cook his food and probably to boil the water that he's going to get. What I finally stumbled on in approaching my military officers and the civilians was, what's my hook to get to them? And I finally thought of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Declaration of Independence tied to our Constitution. We take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. It's in our heart, if you stay for a long enough time. So telling them that this is about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and explaining it in those terminologies, and showing them how it fits together, got me more connected. I didn't say they all fell in love with the idea, but got me a little bit closer to the door being open about approaching environmental security. Life-sustaining things, basic liberties, and pursuit of happiness. Now, if you looked at my definition from the previous slide, my fundamental definition of environmental security is that anything that denies basic human needs destabilizes areas, thus becomes a security threat. Because if you don't have your basic human needs, what are your choices? In the Army terms, we put it as fight or flight. Those are the only real things that you've got. And both of those become challenges for a military. So, where do you think 9 billion people are going to be in 2050 in the hierarchy of human beings? Where do you think they are right now? How many vote for pursuit of happiness? I guess we're on this vote about the pursuit of happiness thing. Life-sustaining conditions is what most people look. That's my view of the world. And certainly the places, the 52 countries the Army has sent me, that's mostly what I saw. That was the big question I asked myself and got me into this mess. Not what was going on, but why. If you don't address why it's going on, then you don't get to solving the problems. And why it was there is because they didn't have basic human needs met. Something was missing. Something was taking that away. And in my view, sometimes, in fact, most of the time, it was human-induced environmental change that was denying them some of those basic human needs, particularly for water. We polluted it like Liz was talking about. So, how do I tie together? To do strategic analysis, I have to have some parameters that I collect, like Vic was just talking about. You've got to have metrics to understand how to define a problem. And so I started looking at things that were environmental degradation problems. Water is a scarce resource. Deforestation, desertification, those kinds of issues. And now, how do I compile, understand, analyze those things to determine whether a particular area is going to be a security risk, is already a security risk? And I started putting statistical analysis together. And I started saying it's probably not one thing that is going to be the driving factor to cause a nation to fail, a region to lack basic human needs. But it's probably some combination of them. And I found the one that we all agree on is the independent variable population. If you have high population growth rates, rates, you're probably going to be more at risk than one that has a stable population. That's a hit-your-head homer kind of finding for research. But I also found that water resource data in most places in the world, if you're lacking basic human needs, from the UN standard of 50 liters per day for just basic survival rates to what we do in the United States calculations of about 125 gallons per day per person when we design systems in the United States. Somewhere in there, if you don't have enough water, you're going to have a problem. Loss of arable land, another one. Loss of forestry. The real secret I found out is it's not in absolute values, it's in the rate of change. Now, what have we seen with our climate change data? What has been our problem? It's the rate of change that we've seen over the last 150 years in the amount of carbon that's in the air that has the exact same model of the temperature rising at that same very, very high rate. Rates we've never seen in the world before. Rates of change in these other things cause the same problems. Create instability and insecurity in the world. So what I did is I built a matrix and I started regressing data to figure out where are the worst places in the world. And I came up with these kinds of numbers. And you see places like South Sudan pretty much fails in everything. Places like Chad, very, very bad. Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan. Key is they all have very high population rates, and most of the rest is bad. I just put U.S. and France on the bottom to be examples. Yes, ma'am?
What's RNI?
Rate of natural increase. That's a good question. If you go look at population statistics, there are like 25 different ways to determine what's going on in a population. Most of the time you just hear growth rates. The total change in the population. That rolls everything together. I did an analysis, and I think for looking at what we're trying to find out, rate of natural increase is just deaths and births. The difference between the deaths and births. It doesn't take immigration in, and these many other factors there. That was a big problem for me, is picking the right data set from the population. Thank you for that question. Okay, now, everybody who's built a model before knows that a model is junk in equals junk out unless you can validate it against something else. And that was my next problem. How do I validate what I'm doing here? Well, there's this data set. Let's see if this guy comes up. This is the Fragile States Index. It's put together by the social scientists, and it says here they used to call it failed states, but that's not polite. So now we call it fragile states. I tell you, the lady would probably witness this, but we were just watching. Somalia is not a fragile state. It's done. These are the worst states in the world. And what you see is the worst states in the world from a failed state social science interest are the same ones that we were just talking about over here. That's what the numbers beside those names of countries are about. I'm following those now for about 10 years. So, the only thing that you will see in this data set is war makes a difference. Iraq was number 3 at one time in the middle of the Iraq fight. Afghanistan was number 3 in the middle of the fight. They shift, but there's still the basic problem in most of these countries is that they're not able to provide basic human needs to the people. And that creates an insecurity, instability, which produces failed states, and then we're back to fight or flight. Where do they go, though? Where are the people from Syria going? Into Europe. There's 3 million of them in Europe right now, and they're overwhelming the resources that are there to support them. There's just not enough there for 3 million. The prediction for Bangladesh is with another 1.5 feet of sea level rise, it will displace 35 million people in Bangladesh. And I don't know the numbers for Pakistan and India, who have lowland water too. But it could be hundreds of millions of people displaced. This is why, even if there's not war, this is why military are so concerned. If you pick up the number and dial 911 for a disaster of that magnitude, it's the United States military that's answering the phone. It has been, and Rick and I were involved in the Rwanda mission in 1994. Then we called it MUTWA, Military Operations Other Than War. 1 million people in Goma, Zaire, sitting on volcanic rock that had fled the Rwanda genocide. And we decided we would go over there and try to provide support to them. The United States military is the only people who could fly that much stuff into the middle of Africa, move these resources you needed, water treatment systems in there, food to support them. We did not treat them. We sent medical only for our own folks, but we supported the medicals from the wonderful people with Doctors Without Borders and those kinds of people. That was 1 million people for a short term. For 35 million people that will never have a place to go back to when you're talking about climate change and sea level rise, that takes critical support from the whole world, and probably will still not go well. So that's what I did. I have created a map to say, now we can do security threat analysis and look at places in the world, and also maybe look at the right things. Instead of building bigger armies, maybe we should be building water resource systems and those kinds of things in our planning. Here's a case study. I gotta go quick on this one. The Nile River. You'll also notice that 5 of the countries that I just had on my failed states thing, they're up there. So, what you have on the left, you have the rainfall that occurs in the latitude. On the right, you have a wild guess at how much water is in the Nile River on an annual basis. Billion cubic meters per year is the number that we're working there. That's a lot of water. But what you see is all the water is generated in the tropical, subtropical region, which is at the bottom of the map, and then as it goes north, there's less and less natural water going into the system. If you like ironies, which I do, I love, there's a place up there on the map called Aswan. That's the Aswan Dam in Egypt that was built by the Russians in the 50s. All of the water that's really used by the people of Egypt goes to the Aswan Dam, and it's a water resource management system. Here's the irony. Of that 91 billion cubic meters of water, the average rainfall at Aswan in Egypt on an annual basis, calculated to 100th of an inch per year, is 0.00. It only rains there every couple of years, and not very much at the time. So the people of Egypt and the people above that live on water that comes from somebody else. Like Ethiopia, who is building dams and water resource management right now so that they can get better use of that water. Okay, that's today. Now let's look a little bit further. Oops, got the wrong way. The bottom line to this is today, the water use is 170 billion cubic meters. The population growth rate predicts it's going to go from 265 million to 700 million people that's using that water, and the demand for the water would then double. But they're already mining water. There's more water than's being used already than is available. That means they're taking down their reservoirs. Sounds familiar if you ask the people at Lake Mead and stuff. But here we're talking about 700 million people, nearly a billion people, struggling for water, struggling for enough water to produce food. Is this a national security threat? is it something that we have to consider, considering the fragile nature of everything out there? What happened if Egypt goes under and our last sort of cooperating partner in that region of the world is not available to the United States? Yeah, it's a big issue for us. Okay, last couple minutes on climate change. I don't have to tell this to thank God. I found a place I don't have to preach about. It's real, folks. Come on. It's real. It's not fake news. No. This is one of the greatest successes, I think, of the United Nations. They have for more than 30 years been running this program to collect data, peer review it, make sense out of it in a world scale view. And I think they've been very successful. 2,000 scientists, every nation of the world is contributing to this. What I'm reporting is number 6. The most recent report just came out of the science. There's usually 3 pieces to it: the science, the mitigation, and then a response mechanism, impacts, adaptations. The 3,949 pages are out. Here's the good news. There's a summary for policymakers that reduces the reading requirement by 3,900 pages. It's only about 45 pages. It's worth reading, and I referenced it on the sheet I passed out. Everything that we have said about the changing climate got worse from the previous report. It's warmer, ocean level rise, it's continued to go, and you see, because we're interested in oceans, the oceans have warmed to an average of 8.88 degrees centigrade. But that's the overall ocean. Many places in the world, it's several degrees it's increased. The one that scares me most is the cryosphere. The only thing that was dramatically different from the previous science report, we upped the number of the rate of loss of snow and ice cover. And that's very scary for water resources around the world, because that provides the water, for example, to that plateau. But what does it really mean? We call this climate change. This is what a geographer produces when he or she looks at what the world looks like. The biomes of the world, the tropics, the deserts, the subtropical regions. That's how it maps out across the world. That determines what animals live where and what people do in that part of the world to sustain themselves. What we're seeing in climate change is, right now, we're showing this map that's been good for 10,000 years. That means all the species on Earth are threatened in one manner or another, because we have completely redone this in 150 years of what we are doing to the planet. That's what climate change really is, redrawing that whole map and what is able to go on in those regions. And yeah, there's some winners, but there's a whole lot more losers, because the people already live in the places that were nice for our conditions, the temperature and the ability to grow food as we do it, and that's changing. That's changing dramatically. Last thing I want to say before just closing is, this isn't easy. On the left, you see the supply of where we get our energy in the world, and on the right, you see how we use it. Changing that model, the economics, the technology, I'm going to trivialize it. This is a great book that a guy from MIT just wrote. He says, an optimist playbook to electrify the whole country. Yeah, boy, he was an optimist. But it's really, really great numbers on how much we can change if we choose to do it. And this is what he's talking about. There's some easy ones up there and some hard ones. To me, getting rid of coal was the first and most important one, and the easiest to do, because we can replace that with renewable energy with relatively easy. Some of them are very, very hard. So this is what the UN says it looks like for the United States under a couple of different scenarios. If we lower the carbon emissions by a little bit, if we don't do much at all, we're talking about 11 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100. The average temperature in the United States going up 11 degrees, making many places in the United States uninhabitable, certainly without water. I usually start with a cartoon and end with a cartoon. I'm going to end with this cartoon. This cartoon has 3 errors in it. First, I think it's culturally illiterate. Yo, amigo. All right. Second, it does well represent the idea of a guy, my little guy with the sticks on his back trying to get enough energy in Afghanistan. He's there with his burrow and the axe. What really is scary is this cartoon came from the San Jose Gazette in 1989. And how much progress have we made do we see there? Is that still valid today? Climate change is truly a world-scale issue. It's a fight we can't afford to lose, but we all are going to have to fight it together. And if you want to know what I really feel about this, or at least at the time I was writing, I wrote a summary on my fact sheet. You can look at it there, or we can talk about it later. I'm done.
All right, is it okay if we all take a 10-minute break? Please. So let's set our clocks now. That's exactly 11 minutes, 10:30 a.m. So we can get started.
Okay, welcome back. Our MC, Val Harvey.
Good morning again. Can I please ask all the past district governors to please stand and be recognized? Thank you. Chris has 3 decades experience in environmental conservation and restoration. He is particularly concerned with the maintenance of ecosystems to function naturally, sustainably, and preventing demise of ecological services by human exploitation, reaching past the tipping point where nature is not permanently damaged. In Hawaii, Chris was the liaison for the 12 governments and 4 NGOs managing 100% of the marine areas and 87% of the land of the Hawaiian Islands. Chris arranged the annual Environmental Conservation Conference with more than 1,000 attendees. In Maryland, Chris ran a native plant nursery producing plants to sustain the native flora and fauna of the Chesapeake Bay. In Rotary, Chris has given many conservation presentations, including the past 100 years, 99% damage of keystone species, and on climate change and its relationship to the areas of focus. In 2014, Chris toured India with Kindness in Action Inc. with the specific goal of finding environmental sustainability of Rotary's humanitarian projects. Chris is past president of the Rotary Club of College Park, Maryland in 2016-17. He was the executive director of SRAC 2016-17, a co-founder of SRAC and chair from 2019 to 2021. He is the incoming chair of RAC's Council and representative for Rotary at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Please join me in welcoming Chris Patak.
I'm just going to start with a book announcement, and so this book has just recently been released. It's the highest seller on Amazon right now for the environment, and so I'm going to have 3 questions during my presentation, and I'd like SRAG not to be the ones that jump up because they might have heard these questions before. So anybody around the room can do that. This book covers virtually everything we've been hearing about today, and so we're providing solutions, providing deep insight into how we can move ahead. Also QR codes to get you into the kids version, obviously the printed version. And every page in this has a wealth of resources. If you click on the page, you can get maybe 50 or 60 references to any part of that. So let me just start my presentation. Sorry?
It's a great book.
Okay, thank you. All right, imagine blue carbon. So we've been talking a little bit today about blue carbon. That's essentially referred to everything that's below water, in the water, and anything that's touching the water. Okay, so that's blue carbon, and I want to talk about global grants and opportunities for global grants in particular. I'm in ESRAG now. I'm the senior advisor for ESRAG, and because I've turned out as a director of ESRAG, and my focus, as I mentioned, is on global grants. So friends, here it is. So this is today's menu, really quickly, and you can read that there, but I'm just going to skip that because we don't have very much time, but this is what we're going to be looking at. And so we've been hearing about the world having 70% saltwater oceans and seas. 1% is fresh water in streams and rivers and lakes, and the remaining 29% of land actually has water in it. Okay, so we're all dependent on water, as Liz was mentioning before. After World War II, there was a common phrase, fight pollution by dilution. And that was, I remember that when I was about 5 years old. My mother was saying, okay, how do we deal with pollution? You flush it down the toilet, flush it through the water system. However, now the chemistry in there was and is extremely important. I'm going to be giving a presentation on the 24th of this month on Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring. And that book drew attention to the fact that we can poison virtually everything, anything. And now 60 years later, we've learned some lessons from that, but we're still doing it. My picture up here is the turtle can really survive in a Sargasso Sea, but it can't survive, I'm sorry to do out of focus, but in plastics. And these plastic gyres in the Sargasso Sea, which is a gyre, basically operate exactly the same way, but the turtle has no chance in a process. Okay, so here we are. Where are we? We're still going wrong. We're cutting 15.3 billion trees down a year. How many trees is Rotary planting a year to make any action into building that nature solution back? We have been cutting down trees for at least 10,000 years. And so we've been doing continuous deforestation. You think about England. England talks about the green hills of England, but England was a forest one time. So then with industrial agriculture, we have now talking across the United States, we talk about climate smart agriculture. Some people, regenerative agriculture is another term for it, but in the EPA and USDA, we're talking about climate smart solutions for that, which basically tries to keep carbon in the ground. Since the Dust Bowl, we've been trying to keep carbon in the ground. They've had lots of ways of trying to do that, but we're starting to do. Overfishing, we've heard this morning, we're vastly overfishing, way beyond the ability for fish to replenish themselves. And we know that because we are now catching fish that were large, now they're smaller and they're still acceptable. And so this is, we're actually not letting fish get to the age where they need to be to reproduce. Talking about mangroves, but talking about virtually everything. In the past 50 years, we have diminished a lot of these forests by 50%. And we've been hearing a lot about pollution from heat and from fossil fuels in particular, leading to temperature rise around the world. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Pollution from insecticides and herbicides, killing virtually everything. And then pollution from plastics and microplastics. these are being absorbed by all of us right now. We've heard this the other day, but animals see often the plastics as food, and then they're feeding that to their infants. Those bellies of those infants are then full of plastics, and they die. Birds in particular, you see this happening all the time. So in a perspective, I would like to say that 92% of our decline over the last 200 years has been through habitat loss, ecosystem services disruption, human destruction, and the diseases, because everything is coming closer and closer together. And just one thing, the nature solutions will do something to help us if we do that. However, the climate crisis is not going to be solved by nature solutions. Just get that in here. We can do as much as we like to preserve the planet through nature solutions. That's going to keep us going, sustain us. But however, it's not going to be the solution to the climate. And here's why. Okay, the United Nations predicts that at least 25,000 species are going to go extinct in the next 30 years. Some say closer to 1 million. Okay, I just want to stop here and say, well, some say closer to 1 million. What does that really mean? What does it really mean, closer to 1 million? How many species are there in the world? Do you know how many species? I'd like somebody to make a guess, and you get a copy of the book. Okay, guess how many species of animals, plants are in the world today?
A lot.
A lot. Okay, well, give me a number, because it says 1 million. It says 1 million species. Well, it doesn't mean anything if I don't know how many species are being really lost. Okay. 100 million. 10 million. 10 million close? 10 million? Okay, I take 10 million because it's about 8.7 million species in the world today, and there may be up to 10 million species because we haven't described them. Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. No, I'm not going to go to the next question, but anyway, on the slide here you can see the things that are really hurting us. Invasive species are taking out spaces where there are native species. Native species need to be there to maintain what was there naturally. Invasive species come in and they're sterile. They do not help the place that you're in. So you're actually, every time an invasive species comes in, it's actually removing the space that can be used by a native species. And this is happening all the time. You can see the other things in the pollution and so on. Resilience. When a tiger comes at me and attacks me, then it's likely not to survive, unfortunately. So we're losing a lot of our nature. 92% before, as I said before, from the damage we're doing to the environment through our resources, and 8% from energy. Okay, this slide here, this talks about where carbon has been stored. These are years and years of carbon, millions of years, 300 millions of years of carbon have been stored. And now what are we doing? Every 3 seconds, we're burning about 1 million years of carbon that's been stored away. So here's my next question. We're producing all this carbon into the atmosphere. When we talk about 2 degrees of warming, what does that really mean? So how many degrees of warming was there between the climate minimum and the climate maximum? The last climate minimum was 23 million years ago, and the climate maximum was just 10 million years ago. What is that range in temperature that we're talking about between when it's coldest, when we had a massive ice front out here, we've been floating amongst glaciers, amongst icebergs right now. We might be hitting one. But which would be a great thing. But what is the temperature difference between the climate minimum and the climate maximum? Any?
5 degrees Celsius.
5 degrees Celsius?
5 degrees.
Okay, getting close.
1.5.
No, it's 8 degrees. 8 degrees between the climate minimum and the climate maximum. Climate minimum drew the water out of the sea, and it would have been about 100 meters lower than it is now, and climate maximum, it was around about 10 meters higher than it is now. So, who gave me an answer that was close to that? 7 was over there, thank you. Okay, here we go. And my next question is, and this one's not for a book, but this is a question that I think is on nobody's mind, because they don't want to address it. So, if we were using nature-based solutions to actually draw down the carbon that's being produced right now, how many Earths will we need this year to just absorb the amount of carbon we're putting out this year? How many?
20.
Nobody has actually even worked on this because it's the elephant in the room we don't want to test. Okay, so I think it's probably at least greater than 5. Okay, more than 5 Earths will be needed to address the problem of the amount of carbon we are producing each year. So that's not the solution. The solution is getting off coal, getting off oil, getting off these fossil fuels. That is the only way we're going to solve this. Okay, now to Rotary. Rotary has given us 4 objectives with can be taken below water for blue water carbon, above water for green carbon. So these are they. Conserve nature and biodiversity from species to landscape scale protection. That is one. The second is mitigate climate change by reducing and avoiding greenhouse gases or ensuring that they're absorbed or stored in natural carbon sinks. Now this is one that just tweaks me just a little bit, because I have been stressing that the ocean is not for us a carbon sink, because when we sink the carbon into the ocean, we change it. Acidification, heat, all these things are affecting us, which we've heard of in the last few days. Anyway, so the carbon sink has to be something that's not the water. Okay. The next is to facilitate sustainable and adaptable livelihoods with smaller ecological footprints that maintain people's social well-being in compatible and flourishing natural systems. That's straightforward enough, but that's what we have to do. We have to work with people to do this. And the fourth one is quite surprising for the environment, because when we were thinking about the environment in the first place, we were not really thinking about strengthening environmental quality by addressing socio-environmental issues that disproportionately affect marginalized communities. This is great that it's in there, but it's certainly when we were focusing on green and blue, this is not there. And then when the first guidelines for the environment came out, I was really surprised by that, but I was really glad to see it was there. And I think we all should be really pleased that that is one of the focuses of the environment as we move forward. This is a slide that Rick showed the other day, or it's not exactly that this has the same information on it. So the guidelines for the environment were set out with 8 action goals. And these 8 action goals I've summarized here as conservation, resources, food, energy, resilience, education, economy, and health. So these were the ones that were embedded previously. The new action goals and new guidance document just appeared on the Rotary International website in the last couple of days. So that is there. Please go to that and look for it, and I'll show you later on how to find that. There are 3 more goals that are now included. Land use. As we heard from Liz this morning, land use is an important thing to look at, and tools that are associated with collecting data. Innovations. So if you've got an idea for a project that is innovative and hasn't been used before, we are looking for that in a global grant. Please present that to Rotary International as a global grant. Okay, scholarships. These were always there. However, now they're included in the action goals. And the thing about this is most of the projects that have come forward so far, at least half, 50% of the projects that have come forward have been around scholarships. And protected areas, Liz was talking about protected areas of reefs and oceans and other areas. Certainly all the mangrove areas, most of the mangrove areas around the world are now protected under some government regulation. Okay, how am I doing for time? Okay, all right. I just want to talk about some threats. This is a slide that talks about mangroves. And so we're talking about mangrove loss, losses through climate change, losses through coastal development. We'd like to build a hotel here. A mangrove is in the way. Okay, pollution. The mangroves just attract pollution. As you saw on Bermuda, everything that washes in is not all the stuff that's being thrown as people walk along those paths. It's all washing into the sea as well. And so that's a problem. In agriculture, at least half of the world's mangroves have been depleted by production of shrimp. Now, who ate shrimp in the last couple of days? Okay, I see some people just not wanting to really raise their hand, but yes, those shrimp have probably come from Ecuador, where at least 50% of their mangroves have been removed to produce shrimp. Once those areas are depleted, they've actually added so much chemical in there, they're going to move on to another space. But so after this meeting, actually, I'm flying down to Ecuador to look at 2 mangrove projects down there. The services of mangroves, they provide livelihoods for people, they produce a lot of income potential, they regulate climate, and I just want to stop here because we think of fisheries. Now, mangroves are really good for as a nursery for fish. And if you're in Florida, then you know that the grouper and the parrotfish come into the mangroves, they stay there for about 6 years, and then they move out to the reef. They actually then harvest the reef for algae, and the grouper, of course, take down the smaller fish, and so it's a whole ecosystem that happens out there. Okay, so just want to stop here. Next book. Okay, question 3. What is the most abundant species of group of organisms that are in mangroves? Just one. Insects. Insects are above, yes, but they're not the most abundant. In the water. Crustaceans, no. No. Bacteria, no. Goodness, I can't give this book away. Okay, who's ever heard of a bristleworm? Bristleworm. Okay, bristleworms are the most abundant species of organism that are in mangroves. And you probably haven't even thought about them. In fact, probably like here from this room, nobody has thought about bristleworms. So these are part of all types of worms, but they are the most abundant in mangroves. They're providing a lot of the food for the fish and everything else, the crabs, the lobsters, everything else that are in a mangrove. These guys are the diet of the mangrove, the species that are in the mangrove. Okay, so let's go on. Tourism is a big thing. Water filtration, yes, water's coming in, being filtered. A lot of pollution that comes down is being locked away in the sediment of a mangrove. And coastal protection for people that are behind the mangroves. Okay, just talking a little bit about Bermuda. It's on the left-hand side of this. So the most damage that's going to be happening to the Bermuda mangroves is largely around sea level rise and erosion that's happening through sea level rise. And some of the yellow in there is actually to do with invasive species blocking out the spaces where the mangrove should be growing. And so that's what we were doing yesterday, 2 days ago, was actually removing the trees that were there. They'd been working on that for a couple of days, and and now we did plant some species, and Rick, yes, Vic, I do know how many plants we've put in the ground when we did that work. So we do have some capacity on that, but we don't know how many pounds of plastics and things we've collected from the sea. Okay. Moving on to what we can imagine that we can do. So I've been tapped to be running a program called Mangrove Restoration for Sustainable Livelihoods. COP26 in Glasgow, the British Commonwealth put together an event. Shaker Mehta was there. He really jumped in with that and really wanted us as Rotary to take on mangroves as a project. It's sort of a movable chair. It started with 5 or 6 or 7 grants by mid-year, 7 or 8, 9, 10, 12 grants by the end. So we sort of settled on 10. Judith DeMint tasked me to make this happen. And then at COP27, Jennifer Jones is going to be presenting the outcomes of all this work that we've been doing. The delegation for the Blue Zone at COP27 is Jennifer, Judith DeMint, Keith Madden, who's the environment manager for Rotary, Mohammed Dalwa from Egypt, and myself. Okay, did I say that one before? Oh, I went backwards, sorry. We used somebody. Okay, so I'm not going to go through every one of these with a photograph of what we've been doing in any one of these places, but on the Commonwealth side of things, because we had to develop up Commonwealth presentation projects, we've got 11 countries, probably about 15 or 16 actual projects that we're working on, and you can see the dollar amounts that are there associated with those projects. One of the things I really want to emphasize is we've got countries that have these projects do not have a lot of money. They are not producing a lot of money for their in their DDF and their from the local funds. They need international partners. They need primary partners. So if you're interested in any one of these countries that you can see up here, just talk to me. We can find a way of connecting you. I would like every club around the world to be associated with a global project. That will get you into the water, of working with a global grant. Okay, I turned down here in the Seychelles. The Seychelles did not proceed. We actually started working with them. They thought that their mangroves were too small to actually get a global grant together for that. Largely the problem there is coastal resource resort development, and so there's we need to work with the government to get that to work.
Is people pressure population?
People pressure is basically yes, population, collection of resources, collection of firewood, collection of just materials from the mangroves, reducing the mangroves efficiency. Okay. Okay, so then of course when I'm asked to work with Commonwealth countries, people from non-Commonwealth countries are saying, okay, all right, and okay, we need to have some non-Commonwealth countries there too. So Bahrain, and you can see these the two from Ecuador that I'm just going to go and visit. Then we're building one in Sharm el-Sheikh, which has a mangrove just a couple of miles away from it. A couple from the Philippines. Okay, moving quickly through this. Every mangrove project is different. There's no one cookie cutter I can come in and say, this is what we have to do. But what we do have to do, and you can read all those things there, but the three things we have to do, we have to do an impactful project, we have to do it measurably, and we have to do it sustainably. Okay. You've heard about some of the ecosystem services, then what we're doing for community development, we're doing plant nurseries for the species that they need to grow, crab and lobster fattening, honey production, fruit production, tourism, educational centres, training and so on, plastics. And yesterday you saw how some plants are really adapted to growing really quickly. These are the viviparous ones. They actually produce live young. So the plants are drop into the water and then they're ready to go. Other ones are more like peanuts. They have two big cotyledons that are inside, and they're just waiting for the shell to break down so they can germinate. And then you have some slower growing ones like if you're thinking about a coconut or phoenix palm or so on. You saw some of this yesterday. So collecting the viviparous plantlets, you can just poke them in the ground. Well, actually, this is in Ecuador, using plastic sheets. Believe it or not, they take the sheets off and dispose of them. But they generate this in a nursery. You can see the nursery here below. When you've got a low tidal range, this really works well. Just needs to have about half a metre of tidal range, and then you can do this. You then take them out to where they need to be grown, and this is a part of the mangrove restoration that they're doing. It's all the only places where we're doing afforestation. Global grants, these you probably already know about. So just take those in. I've just got to run through this. These are from the new guidelines. When you're putting together something for a global grant, you have to have the precise locality. You have to have community and environmental assessment now. You have to produce metrics that are linked to the budget. They have to show long-term sustainability. And if you want to work towards a program of scale for any project, and certainly with mangroves, they have to be monitored over a long period of time. And so we'd be probably looking for a program of scale to be advanced maybe in 6 or 7 years. And so we have to measure all the good things we do. We have to capture that data. And I just want to say that there's a lot of talk about carbon capture and carbon trading. Very rarely does a Rotary Club own the space that's putting the plants in the ground. So it doesn't actually own the carbon that's actually being produced or reduced from the atmosphere. It's only when it's owned. Just getting really close to the end. Of the 42 global grants that have been awarded in the last year, 2.3 million, 21 of them were scholarships. They're easy to do. If you want somebody to get trained in the environment, this is a way to get a master's in that. 5 were for environmental education, 5 were for conservation, 4 was for solar. If you want to put solar panels on a roof of a school, that is now part of an environmental project. 3 are for agriculture, 2 are for pollution abatement, measuring how much pollution is in a stream and doing assessment of that, and 2 are for circular economy, plastics recycling. SRAG, I just want to come back to SRAG. This is what, on the right-hand side of the screen, this is what the SRAG can do for you. We want to be involved in every part of any project if you would like us to be there. On the left-hand side is essentially what a club needs. They need a community assessment, the development of the team, the local funding, the resources, the DDF, and for a global grant, only DDF makes a project a global grant. Then project impact reporting, we need to have the data that's associated with every project. Finally, there's an abundance of information on our website, the Rotary International's website. There are new guidelines that have just come out. There are new statements and guidelines and so on. You can just take through that. And so I can't talk about this today, but I could talk for half an hour. This tells me a whole story about climate change in this photograph. You can see the tiger looking out over a space that's been washed away by a river. You can see the lumps of this mangrove in advance. There's about 500 years of, in that 3 feet of soil underneath there, that is stored carbon. And I can just go on and on about this, but we as humans, we don't like tigers. This forest is actually a forest of date palms. The tigers love to eat. They use the forest as hides. So if we don't like tigers, then we're not more likely to just remove the forest and get it out of the way. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to take one home to your club, I'll bet you that. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. If I could please request all the spouses, please stand up and be recognized. All spouses. It is now my distinct honor to introduce 2018-19 Rotary International President Barry Racine of the Rotary Club of East Nassau will share his passion for the sustainable use of our oceans and importance of caring for our planet. There is no plan B. Barry is the first fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives in the Bahamas and retired as president after 38 years with Doctors Hospital Health System in Nassau, Bahamas, where he remains a director. He has been a member of the Rotary Club of East Nassau since 1980, president in 87-88, district governor for 40-40, 70-20 in 91-92, RI director for 2006-8, a trustee of the Rotary Foundation for 16-17, and vice chairman in 2017. He has served on many initiatives in the Bahamas and is currently chairman of the Volunteer Bahamas, a national program to create a culture of volunteerism in the country. He has served both Rotary International and the Rotary Foundation in many capacities, such as the chairman of the Rotary International Finance Committee and as RI training leader and seminar trainer for training leaders. At the October 2018 Board of Directors meeting in Evanston, President Barry graciously agreed for me to conduct a meditation and yoga session. I understand for the first time in the history of the Board of Directors of Rotary, Barry was kind enough to introduce the directors for a topic that was not business related. So please join me in giving a warm, great, passionate, exciting welcome to our 2018-19 President Barry Racine.
Thank you, Bob. No, please. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bob. First time I heard that as part of my intro. First of all, let's be clear, I am not the subject matter expert. And I don't know that I could stand and speak after so many incredible experts have brought this information to us. So I think we're really blessed, and truly I thank you for that. Which kind of leads me to the fact that I'm wearing this shirt. I wouldn't normally wear a shirt like this for a presentation, but as I think about what Drew and his team are doing, I had to wear my flamingos. Everybody know the flamingo story? Yes. All right. Let me bring clarity. Back in 2018, on the cover of Rotary magazine, was a picture of Esther and I and 7 flamingos. We have trained flamingos back home, okay? You have to understand that. There's only 7 of them, but they're trained. If they tell them to go left, they go left. They tell them to go right, they go right. Sometimes. It's not a perfect science. But on that picture, there was one flamingo going in a different direction. that's what we need in Rotary. That one flamingo is the flamingo of change. The one that said, I'm going to be different. I'm going to go in a little different direction. What you don't see is after that picture was taken, all the others turned and went with the one. And that's what we need with change. And so I wore this because I really appreciate that Director Drew is doing something different here. This is change. And we need to adopt that, and hopefully some other directors will see that and they'll turn and go in another direction. I also have to tell you, last time I did a training session a few years back, I was actually District Governor-elect. And we were on a cruise ship because a hurricane hit the island where we were going to have our conference. So I was standing here doing my training, and suddenly noticed somebody get up and run out of the room. Okay, one person was acceptable. 2 persons, 3 persons. People keep getting up and running out of the room. Thinking, okay, I'm not the greatest trainer, but am I making you sick? And I happened to turn around and notice the curtains behind me, because the stabilizers on the cruise ship weren't working. The curtains were going like this. By the time I was finished, half the room was seasick. So hopefully that doesn't happen today. We'll get through this without any of that. I said I'm no subject matter expert, but I know a little about Rotary and some of our history. You've heard how we started with Preserve Planet Earth back in 1990 with Paulo Costa, president. Did a great job, and he, being from Brazil, he wanted to preserve the rainforest there. Fantastic. You also heard about the fact that Ian Risley asked us to plant trees, and we planted many more than the million that he asked us to plant. We really embraced that. I tried to add on to that just by talking about my country, because I know and we know that my country is going to be underwater by the year 2050. And if you hear more and more from the experts, actually we won't make it till 2050. Funny story, I asked, when I was in Singapore last week, I asked them, what are you going to do? You're low to the water too. Oh, we're going to build a wall around the country. Not sure that's going to work. No, it won't work in the Bahamas. But we're all at least thinking about what are we going to do. You also heard from Liz about the fact that the environment really does link to most of the SDGs. And I think we have to keep that in mind as we think about Rotary. It does link to all of our areas of focus. I was trying to link it to peace until this morning we heard that there's a link there for peace as well. So there's a lot of ways we can do projects for our environment. And I also want you to be very clear that Rotary has started a lot of these efforts. You know, they end up coming from UNEP, United Nations Environmental Protection, absolutely great, and they blow up and they get bigger and bigger. Rotary plants those seeds. You know, you think about polio, the fact we are going to eradicate polio, the seed was planted by Rotary. Rotary went to the World Health Organization, and the first time they said, no, that can't work, we're not going to do that. It wasn't until we went back after doing a second country after the Philippines, then WHO said, we'll partner with you. Rotary started that. Well, in 2018, when we were in Kenya, and we recognized Vic for the great work he was doing as a Rotaractor to help the environment, we also had a little meeting with 4 of us around the table. One happened to be the predecessor of Liz, the head of UNEP for the United Nations. And we talked about the need for Rotary to partner with UNEP for the environment. And we all agreed. A little delay because he actually resigned about a week later. Okay, so we sow seeds. Sometimes those seeds don't grow right away, but they still catch on. Today, you've got the head of UNEP talking about how we're working together. Okay, Rotary sows those seeds. I also wanted to make sure we understand that the environment as a topic sits throughout Rotary already. I believe we've just begun. It's going to be a new era. We've only had the area focus for over a year. But our Peace Fellows, our Rotary Scholars are talking about it because they already are becoming subject matter experts. And I just want to give you a couple of quotes from Francesco Minona, a Rotary scholar. Climate change could destroy the livelihoods of millions of people and create much greater migratory pressures than we see today. And he said that there is an exciting trend of innovation and technical advancement in the field of clean energy, especially in how we store electricity and how we make our electricity systems more efficient and intelligent. So here we have a Rotary scholar already going down that road. Then we have a Peace Fellow, Alejandro Rueda Zarate. My biggest fear is that climate change will bring more poverty into the world. And he felt that one of his biggest issues that he faces is persuading farmers to switch from traditional practices to more responsible ones. However, once they become aware of the risks and future challenges, they're willing to switch. Education, understanding, communication, right a part of this that our Peace Fellow understands. And he said the multiple possibilities of recycling renewable fuels such as those made from plants instead of petrochemicals and smart agriculture. We're out there doing what we need to do, but it's only the beginning. So what do we do as Rotary clubs, as individuals? One thing I want to remind you, this has been a great symposium. I have learned a lot. I'm excited by what we can do. But let's not make this like many conferences and symposiums we go to where we're excited, we loved it, it was great, we go home and we do nothing. How often have we seen that happen? Come on, how often have we seen that happen? Thank you, okay. I wasn't alone there. Let's go home and talk to our clubs. Let's talk to our members and make it real and talk. We've talked at a high level in many parts, but let's talk in detail of what we can do as individuals, because we can make a difference individually and collectively. So let me give you a couple examples of what clubs have done. One area, we know the sun is underused energy source, and that less than 2% of the world's electricity is generated through solar panels. So the Rotary clubs of Léogâne, Haiti, which happens to be in my district, so I'm proud of that, and Parker, Colorado, led a global grant project to install a hybrid solar, diesel, and grid power system. The school that was put in saved $4,000 a year in fuel costs and reduced air and noise pollution. It also powers interior and exterior lighting, computers, fans, and educational tools. And a new water distribution system, which uses the hybrid power and literacy program, were also part of the grant. Look how much you can do with one grant. And you're impacting the environment. And you're bringing clubs in different countries together to get that done, because that's a global grant. I mean, you've got all the factors that help us to be a better world. Another example, tropical forests, as we know, once covered 12% of our world's land. I'm going to be like Chris. How many know what it is now from 12%? Close, 5%. I don't have any books, but Chris can give you one of them. That loss accounts for up to 19% of greenhouse gas emissions caused by us, humans. So, the Rotary clubs of, I can't pronounce that, the Rotary Club in Madagascar, and a Rotary Club in Italy, and a Rotary Club in France got together, and they partnered with a local nonprofit on a project to reforest about 125 acres with native species grown from wild seed, creating jobs for area families and tourism infrastructure. They also trained women in gardening techniques, constructed toilets, and provided 500 improved cook stoves. Look how much we could do. We get together collectively and we put a grant together. So some great examples of things that we could do that are not that difficult. We just got to reach out, and if we find a project that's going on, see how we can join it if we don't want to start our own. And although the area focus has only been there for a little over a year, $18.4 million in Foundation Global Grant funding has already been allocated to environment-related causes in the past 5 years through our support of community, economic development, as well as water sanitation and hygiene projects. Now, I was next going to go through the action goals, but Chris covered that for me. Thank you, Chris. He took about half of my speech, by the way. But that's good. That's a good thing, because that means it's getting out there and being done. And there's all kind of individuals and corporations out there who want to help our environment. Talk to corporations in your area and ask them what they want to do and how Rotary can partner with them. We have an individual who wants to develop the use of solar power panels in the world. And he has said that any club that wants to work with him, he will provide the funds to do those solar panels. Any club. He's a significant donor and could really do a lot to help us. There are a lot of individuals out there like that, don't know how to make that move. Rotary clubs do know how to make that move. So let's find them, let's look for them, let's ask individuals in our community what they want to do for the environment. You know, we know we have this challenge with our membership, and a lot of it is engaging our members, a lot of it is getting our donors to continue to support. And part of that is because the world has gone to cause-based work. So it's hard for them. Rotary, it's just an organization. I don't give to an organization. I want to give to a cause. Well, a lot of people want to give to environment as a cause. We as Rotarians need to make sure they understand that that is one of our causes, and you could give it through Rotary to the environmental project you want to do. You know, I remember when I was a kid, I was told often that my eyes were bigger than my stomach. It's probably true. I've always enjoyed eating. And so I would pick off more than I possibly could. Well, apparently I've continued that in the Rotary world. And hand wash is an example of that. I believe we need to think bigger than we've had thinking in the past. So we didn't want to go into Haiti, which is the 11th most difficult country in the world. Okay? That's staggering. So if we go in there and give a well here and a well there, are we really making a difference? We said no. Let's go in and bring water to every citizen of the country. Because if we bring water to every citizen, they're also going to then be able to get an education. They're also then going to be able to get better with their health needs. We can begin a whole trend to change that country and move them from being the 11th weakest country in the world. But we have to think bigger if we're going to do those kind of things. We also heard about the need to advocate with our governments. And Rotary is very good at advocating. And we need to think in all our communities, if we talk to our government about our environmental needs, what can we do? And we need to bring them solutions where we can partner with them. I'm in that process right now, so I clearly understand that sometimes you feel you're hitting your head against a cement wall. Right now, I'm trying to have a conversation with our government. The Perry Institute has the expertise to do projects in our waters. Now, understand, the Bahamas has 726 islands. Okay, that's a whole lot of water that we're in, and a whole lot of reefs. And tourists come to the Bahamas to help us, and to see what we have, and to enjoy the coral reefs, the fish, etc. If we lose that, that's the beginning of the end of our country. So we need to preserve that. So the Perry Institute wants to come in. They put an application in for 7 different projects in our waters. Disney has come in and said, we'll help to fund those projects. And of course, I'm there to say we can help get global grants to extend that funding. And now we're trying to get the government on board. Well, our Minister of Environment isn't the strongest minister in the world, so we've gone over his head to somebody in the Prime Minister's office, and the next up is the Prime Minister. We have to continue advocating to make sure we can make these things happen. In my mind, the Bahamas is the ideal country in the world to be the place where people go to find out what you can do to help our oceans. Because we have so much water and different islands and all the different needs that we can do. So let's do that. The islands and coastal regions of the world are going to be overrun with water. That's a reality. Right now, today, when there's a king tide, South Florida communities are flooded. Beautiful day outside, no rain. They're flooded because there's a king tide. The oceans are rising. And I'm real glad that we're hearing from everybody, we can finally talk about climate change. It was only during 1819 when I brought up climate change, I got some hate mail. It was interesting because one of them was done by a typewriter. You remember typewriters? Yes. So maybe they were a little out of touch, but the reality is now, today, it's changed. Just since 1819, it's changed. It's much more recognized. There are still some who don't believe it, but that's okay. You always have some. But we have an ability now to really take this a step forward. And countries like ours, or around the world, are talking now. We're having a conversation. We're bringing it to the table. What do we do? The Maldives has passed a law that I think is by the year 2025, no plastic is allowed in the country whatsoever. Now Rotary went to our government a few years back and we stopped plastic bags. But that's just one part of the problem. We haven't been able to stop plastic bottles for water, but that's because that company that makes water in plastic bottles has influence. But we'll get there. We're talking to that company as well, so we can make that happen. So Rotary is doing something. I also wanted to talk about the Philippines, because Rotary in the Philippines done an extraordinary project. They saw that one of the major rivers was polluted, terrible pollution. When they went there, they realized that people are living on both sides of the river. They have no toilets, no facilities, no water. And they weren't getting education. It was just poverty right along the river. And therefore that contributed to the pollution. So what Rotary did is they put together a project where nearby, you literally could walk from the river to this area. They created a residential area so people could move and live there. They put in a school, they put in a community center, they put in a church. So they created an entire community, and then they got one side of the river to move from the river to the community. Then they could start cleaning up the river. What an incredible project. You want to join a project? Find something like that to join if you're not comfortable with starting something. But now they're working on their next project on the other side of the river so they can completely clean up that area. So really, really working good. You know, I mentioned our government, and you've heard a lot about COP26 last year. Prime Minister of my country was at COP26, and in my opinion, made the best speech I've ever heard him make. Okay, he told them about what's going to happen to the Bahamas, and he asked them politely, all of these first world countries need to make change so we can survive. Again, it's the message. We need to keep talking about it as we have been doing. The Commonwealth Committee, you've heard about what we're doing with mangroves. Chris is doing a fantastic job with taking that program away. back in 2018, Esther and I and Judith Dinant met with the Commonwealth Secretariat to talk about what they thought we could do together. And we talked about mangroves. We planted the seed. Today we hear all about the mangrove projects around the world. Rotary plants seeds in mines as well as in the ground. So let's keep doing that because we can really make differences. So I just want to close with reminding you of a couple of quotes you heard right here on the cruise ship. Without a healthy ocean, we don't have a healthy planet. It's true. We need to remind our members back home that that is the case and ask what we can do. Tell me how long till we wake up. Now that's a great message to take to our clubs because they need to understand we need to wake up and address the environmental issues of the world. We can make a difference. Also, climate change is real, it's happening now, and each one of us can be part of the solution. Thank you. Absolutely right. So remember, this is not just a great symposium, it's the start of each of us to take action. So I'd ask you to go home, talk to your clubs, talk to your community, talk to your local governments. Make sure they understand that we need to make our world a better place for the sake of our grandchildren. Or what are they going to have left when we're gone? It's up to us, each and every one of us. Rotary is there to help you to accomplish big things for our environment. So I ask you, let's make it happen. Thank you.